I retired in 2006 and began to think about what I would do with the rest of my life, and harkened back to my days as an Army helicopter pilot when I was wounded in Vietnam and spent 6 months in a hospital about 700 miles away from home, and wasn't doing well, quite frankly, until my family gathered the resources to come and see me. So I began to think about how I could alleviate some of that for the young guys that are coming home wounded today with my airplane, and I thought about flying families to the local VA, and as I developed the idea, it got out of hand, and now we have a nationwide network of close to 1,000 pilots and aircraft owners who fly wounded warriors home on convalescent leave or bring their families to see them, or whatever the needs are. We started with a mission in a young Marine from Melbourne, Florida, who wanted to go to Camp Lejeune to receive his Purple Heart and his combat badge, and he was wheelchair bound and crutches, so he was kind of between the wheelchair and crutches. And he got on an airliner. Someone gave him a frequent flyer ticket, and of course a frequent flyer ticket, you don't have a choice necessarily of. So he flew from Melbourne to Atlanta, to Birmingham, to Charlotte, and then to Jacksonville, North Carolina, and he spent 13 and a half hours going through airports, pulling along his wheelchair or his crutches, and was exhausted when he got to Camp Lejeune, and wasn't up for the ceremony, really. He was totally exhausted by the time he got there. His father called the Department of Defense and said, "Isn't there another way?" And we had just started. They happened to know about us, and he called us. We had no volunteers at the time. This was in November of '06. Called a friend in Savannah, Georgia, and they flew up and picked him up and flew him home in a private airplane in about 2 hours. And that was the beginning. And they wrote a story on their pilot network, and within a couple of weeks I had 40 of their friends that fly the same kind of airplane all over the country had signed up. And since then it's just grown that way. We have a network of about 1,000 pilots, and we have they're in our system, and we get a travel request from a wounded warrior or his family member at, say, Walter Reed or BAMC in San Antonio, Brooke Army Medical Center, or Balboa Naval Hospital in California, or any of the military installations that have hospitals. They'll put in a travel request online, and right on our website, veteransairlift.org, they can put a travel request in online, and then we take that travel request. They give us the dates of travel and how many passengers are needing to travel and their story, and we blast an email to the pilots along that line of flight that have volunteered. And generally we don't have any trouble getting volunteers to say, "I'll take that flight." So they email me back, and we assign them the mission, and they get in touch with the passenger, and it all happens from there. So it's fairly thin in terms of our operating platform. We're not a big organization yet. We can handle this travel nationwide with all of our 1,000 volunteers because we have a technology base to do it, scheduling that work. Sometimes we've had someone email back, say, "I'll do the trip," and this is 10 minutes after we send the request, blast email it, and I'll have to write back to them and say, the trip has already been covered. And I'll get responses like, "Well, how fast do we have to respond to get these trips?" So there are a lot of people that are in our volunteer network that are true patriots who are more than willing to give of their time and their aircraft. They pay the total expense of the flight. They buy the fuel. It's their aircraft. They're donating their time and aircraft for the purpose of the flight, and they're anxious to do it. They really appreciate the mission. I think if they've flown one, they're the first ones in line for the next one, if they're available. They love doing it. I like to say we could punish them by buying them an airline ticket and letting them suffer the same way we all do when we fly commercially, or reward them by putting them on a private airplane. And it's more than just a ride. It's more than buying them a ticket from here to there. It's I like to say it's more than a ride, it's a relationship, because generally aircraft owners are community leaders who can have an influence and have an impact. And these wounded warriors come back saying, "Boy, I really feel the love of America when someone puts their private airplane to use flying me home on convalescent leave and return, and I got to know this great guy." And some of them develop friendships for life as a result of the flight and getting to know one another. And the pilots, quite frankly, return with a whole different view of the young guys and gals that serve in our military. And so they come back and tell their friends about the quality of the people that serve in the military. So it's a win on both ends, in addition to treating these folks in a way that they ought to be treated and honored.